Well, hello again and welcome to Spotlight. Today we're going to have a very unusual guest and one who it's a real great pleasure to talk to again. I'm talking about the lovely and vivacious Tesha Buss, and we're going to talk about a book that she participated in writing. Welcome, Tesha.
Thank you, Ralph, for having me.
Okay, now let's begin by the same question I always ask everyone. Who are you?
Well, I am a teeny tiny dynamo, is what my friends would say. I own a business in Plymouth, Vermont called Good Commons. It is a yoga retreat home. And at a yoga retreat, or actually, we host many different types of retreats. We feed our guests, and throughout the years, our guests have asked for those recipes to be written down and shared. And so that's what I'm doing here today, is sharing that part of my life and business.
Well, I do have to admit, yours is the most readable recipe book I've ever read. So,
Wow.
and that includes Julia. I'm referring to Julia Childs, but she writes some interesting recipes, but that's all that you get. Yours was really a tale of why, how, and with what you developed Good Commons. And the recipes, I believe, were all supplied by your co-author, Matthew Wexford.
Yes.
And I found both of you have a very, very interesting way of expressing yourself. But first of all, let's begin to talk about what is Good Commons, so people who are not familiar with the place in Plymouth can become familiar with it.
Excellent. So I had this idea back when I lived in New York and was a performer turned choreographer. And my friends and I would rent vacation homes and go to them and do yoga in the morning and create all day and maybe spend some time at the beach. And then we would eat these long dinners and imbibe in beautiful bottles of wine and then wake up and do the whole thing again the next day. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be so wonderful if somebody organized that for you and you didn't have to do all of the steps and you could just receive? And then I had a dream that directed me. I came out of the dream and it said, and you will open a retreat center. And I said, okay, well, I guess I don't normally have my dreams tell me what to do so specifically. So I followed this path and visited Vermont. I had worked at the Weston Playhouse for 7 seasons as a choreographer and saw the Vermont Homes Guide and went to look at this property that had not been touched in a very long time. It's an 1840s home. It's 4,700 square feet. We sleep 19 guests communally throughout 6 bedrooms and then a sleeping loft on the 3rd floor. And it always seems strange. People will come in and say, this is supposed to be relaxing, but the loft has 9 beds in it. And that can't possibly be relaxing. And I said, well, it's amazing. You might think that, but people work with it really well. And it becomes this slumber party on the 3rd floor, and people are doing things that they've never done before and talking about things they've never talked to before because they're with a bunch of people that they may not ever see again, except for on a yoga mat across the room. So it's a very interesting place. It has a yoga studio on the 1st floor, which was the general store in town for 150 years. And now it's still a gathering place, but just in a different way.
Okay, well, I think you have an awful lot to tell about what has transpired at Good Commons since you began working in it. First of all, I think you've sort of explained why you were writing the book. Now, how long did it take to write the book?
It took a decade, essentially. We decided to start fundraising to write the book in 2010. We did a Kickstarter campaign, and we did a couple of recipe testing parties back in New York City, and just tried to drum up some, press around writing this. And
Mhm.
the thing about books is that it did take us a little bit of time to figure out its structure. And so we decided to, in telling the stories, start each chapter with a story, and then also start each recipe with a short story as well. So it was kind of my job to think of all of the stories and how they might interweave with these recipes. Most of the time the story kind of has nothing to do with the recipe, except there's just one little morsel that will connect it. So that is what took some time for sure. And then recipe testing, and some very famous TV cooking personalities, they hardly even test their recipes, which is kind of funny. And now I cook a lot. I was trained by Matthew, who wrote the recipes for this book, and now that I cook so much, I can kind of see how they do it, where you just know, okay, well, it's going to take just this much salt, and it's going to take just this much acid, and just this much. So after a while, it becomes second nature, and it's almost like an artist looking at a painting, saying, "Oh, if you want to do shadow, you have to do blah blah blah."
Well, now you and Matthews shared a lot of the writing. He prepared the menus, the recipes, as I recall.
Yes, he did all the recipes, although we did try to take some recipes from our history, which is how we fell in love with food. And it's also what connects everybody emotionally to food as well. And that's one of the main reasons why we wrote the book. People would walk into the kitchen and go, "Oh my gosh, this recipe reminds me so much of what my mom used to make, but it's slightly different. And what is that spice that you added that she didn't have?" And then all of a sudden, you know where they grew up and their whole life story, essentially, in summation. And that is what we're doing. We're connecting with people. And we hope that type of conversation has an energetic presence on the page here. And so Matthew did some of his storytelling from this whole journey. Matthew and I have been friends since 1996. We were in musical theater together. He grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in the Midwest. So, like one of his favorite recipes growing up was beefaroni, which it's so funny.
I love the recipe.
Yeah. And mine was meat three ways. It's like this cheap steak from a cow, because we used to raise our own cows and butcher them. And so it was like, why do we have to eat pan fried steak again in a different way? And my mom was like, "We're poor, shut up and eat." Um, she was like, "I'm making it three different ways." So we did take some of those type of stories and and meld them all together. So Matthew has a large writing presence as well, and Matthew's a food and travel writer now, so he does write a lot for a living, and that kind of helped us figure out the trajectory for how we were going to actually put the book out into the world, considering that we're not authors on a regular basis. This is
Not a hard question, at least
yeah.
from discussing this with other authors. How'd you get it published?
Well, we chose the self-publishing route, so we did the
Okay.
Amazon self-publishing route. But we still hired a copy editor to get through the book, and a few other people that helped do the layout and then the design. Luckily, throughout the years, we've invited some very talented photographers to our place, and then did an exchange with them for um, a weekend for free, and then we would receive a lot of wonderful photographs.
When you go through and start reading it, I found it fascinating. First of all, I learned an awful lot about your background and you and the Buss family. Uh, and actually, we have an awful lot in common with that I never realized based on the food. Uh, let's talk about the yellow elephant. Now, can you explain what the yellow elephant is in the book?
Well, when we bought the book, I mean, we bought Good Commons, and my father came to help me renovate it, and we'd renovated a number of houses together. And in fact, in Illinois, our banker would come to my dad and say, "Okay, Bob, I bought you another property, and here's your renovation budget, and then you can rent it out." Just to make sure that the downtown of our teeny tiny little town could stay vibrant and flowing. So my dad arrives. He did actually check out the property prior to purchasing it. And he said, "Tish, we're going to demo this house in 1 weekend and a case of beer." And it took over 6 months to demo the house. It was unbelievably, I don't even know how many cases of beer that we made it through and how many DJ's dinners we had on Saturday night. It was a lot. And he looked at me and said, "Oh, goodness, I think we should sell this. I don't think we're going to make it." And I was determined at that point, and his love for me was quite large, and we made it through it, and we still talk to each other.
You still talk to one another. Well, I had the privilege of meeting your mother, and she's a very lovely lady.
Thank you.
I haven't had the privilege of meeting your father, but I have to admit, from what I've read, he seemed like a great guy.
Yes.
Hard worker. Now,
very much.
You had a summer intern that you referred to from Illinois. Tell us about that.
Yes. So my father calls me one day and says, "Tish, I have an intern for you." And I said, "Okay." And he goes, there's one caveat. He basically is kind of blind." And I said, "Okay." So my grandmother had macular degeneration. So that is what this particular boy has. And so he isn't completely blind, but he has more sight in his peripheral vision. So it was very fascinating to watch him work in the kitchen, and he has to feel his way through so much of what he's cooking and cutting. And it's a little bit terrifying to watch him sometimes, and for him to try to figure out a level of detail and to be able to to pinpoint that. But it was a really amazing experience, not only from watching him grow and learn and us learning from him, but also the process of, you think an intern's going to be kind of free help, but there's a lot of education that goes into that. And I have to say that I probably learned a lot more than I would have learned, because I think Matthew took for granted sometimes how much I did know or didn't know about the kitchen, but he had to explain it to Justin. So I think I benefited from that relationship on a culinary level as well.
Okay, well, now your book isn't broken down into sections, and one of them, the title, I sort of like. It's So Long But Not Goodbye. What brought on that title?
I gotta say, now that I'm in year 13 of owning this retreat home, I no longer get extremely sad about a group leaving. And mostly it's because our groups come back every year. Sometimes I have hosts that come twice a year. And so I don't experience so much of the bitter, and I do love knowing they're coming back, so there's more sweetness. But at first, it felt like the crash after opening night of a theatrical show, where or like closing night of a very short run of something that was really cherished. And so that brunch, that final day brunch, that's what that has a lot to do with. Just feeling as if this weekend was magical and you may have connected with somebody. You know, we have people that come that have had friend anniversaries. So instead of singing happy birthday, it's an anniversary for a friendship. And we've had a number of best friendships begin at Good Commons, because I don't know, there's just something magical about the fact that you are going away from life and mostly going into a place where you're not going to know very many people, and you tend to open up more, and then you're going to connect more. So
Now, one of the things you mentioned in that particular chapter is the impact of Irene, the storm Irene on you. Now, this must be rather devastating, given that Plymouth suffered a major blow.
it was very intense. I was actually away at a friend of mine's bachelor party, and I got an email from a fella that stayed at my place a lot, who was designing the audio visual work at the Calvin Coolidge estate. And he wrote me an email and it said, Tisha, I went out to try to move your car, but I couldn't find the keys. I'm driving up to the Calvin Coolidge estate through now what is a river, and boulders are coming down the hill towards our little oasis. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. And then I'm watching videos of, you know, houses crashing and gone completely. And I had experienced a number of water issues, being that there is a stream that runs behind the foundation of the house. But I did arrive, and it was still standing. There was 4 feet of rubble that filled my, 12-car parking lot. But that rubble potentially saved my whole foundation. I had water. I had about 4.5 feet of water in my basement, but it didn't reach the top floor. But it did ruin, my heating system, my alarm system, my sprinkler system. All of my large commercial mechanicals were gone. And the Farm and Wilderness Organization came and helped me load 5-gallon bucket by 5-gallon bucket. It took 11 of us all day long to get the majority of the mud out of the basement.
Boy. Now, you also had an interesting experience with automobiles in your process of running Good Commons. I believe your first one was a car you didn't particularly like, called the Subaru, which is a big favorite here in Vermont.
Yes.
What happened to that car?
Well, I was carrying, I don't even know how many gallons of paint in the car from the Labor Day sale at Home Depot. And I'm driving down to New York City on 89, and a mattress flies off the car in front of me. And I thought, oh goodness, I don't know if I can drive over this. So I tried to drive around it. And that did not work. I spun, I landed on the hood of my car, and then flipped to the other side of my car. It was quite the journey. I was in the hospital, and the officer came in with paint from head to toe on him. They were trying to find my license and my cell phone and, any credit card at all, none of which could be found in the dark. I didn't even have my glasses, so I felt completely disoriented. But, I lived to tell the tale with only some, a bunch of glass all over my skin. But other than that, and a pretty bad concussion, I made it through it.
Now, after that kind of an experience, you decided to go for a bigger vehicle, a bus.
Yeah, one that I can, drive over a mattress with. But yeah, that was not my only criteria for the bus. But so I bought a bus mainly because most of my groups at that point were from New York City. That's where I had lived for a decade. That's where my contacts were from. But renting a Greyhound, or everybody doing individual Amtrak tickets, it wasn't financially feasible for the retreats to be able to happen. So I thought, well, I'll just take transportation into my own hands and I'll go pick them up myself. So we would load up our bus with all sorts of fun, awesome snacks, and so that it would feel like when they got on the bus at 45th Street in Manhattan, they had like a piece of Vermont came right there to meet them. And people really loved it. My first bus I bought on eBay, which I don't necessarily recommend, that broke down an awful lot. We converted it to vegetable oil, like the hippies we are. That was also not such a great idea. But then I invested for real in the bus company and grew the company quite quickly. So ultimately, it turned out to be a really good thing. Now most of my groups come from Boston or other parts of the Northeast where it's car culture. So I did end up selling the bus company after a while, but in those early years, it was everything. It was a huge part of the experience.
Okay, now this book is really a recipe book, but it's a recipe book, as I said in the beginning, that I think is far superior to anything else I've ever read because it has a story in it and it has even a little bit of philosophy.
Yes.
One of the recipes that really fascinated me, and I think you've already alluded to it, is the magic hat and meatballs. And then I want to get into the cow. Can you tell me about the magic hat and meatballs, how that came into being?
Well, my parents, for any major party that we would go to, my parents would always make these things called beer balls. And it's basically a meatloaf style recipe with a teeny tiny piece of dill pickle in the middle. And then you would make a ketchup and beer sauce. And so we started making it with Magic Hat #9 here. And I know Matthew has made some adjustments to that. But it's just like one of those things that you're like, whoa, this is so good. And it just takes me back immediately every single time I have beer balls. And then the cow is, so we went to our friends, my friend Michael Huck, and said, all right, we're going to buy a cow from you. And Scottish Highlander beef is very challenging to work with when it comes to those, think French bistro cuts. But its ground beef is just lovely and so lean and so dark. And so it really works so well with the meatballs.
But I understand the cow was a little bit of a problem, at least for Matthew, in terms of the freezer.
Yeah, he had never done anything like this before. And while my parents had growing up, I wasn't in charge of that. I mean, my parents lost our 4th generation family farm when I was 10. So I don't have much memory about how much real estate it takes to put a cow in a freezer along with a pig at the same time. Yes. And the cuts were, Matthew felt very, very much out of his league and certainly developed a new respect for butchering. That's for sure.
Okay, now, one of the other recipes that sort of caught my attention just by the name of it, and that was pork stuffed pork. Now, is this pork that's stuffed in pork or what?
Yes, it is. So, classically a porchetta is this pig that's, stuffed and then roasted. So we had our friend April Stam come up. April worked in Whole Foods for a really long time. So like when you would go to a salad bar at Whole Foods, she was largely responsible for all those recipes at whatever her location was. And so she comes up and we said, April, we have this bag of things from the pig. We have no idea what they are. She was like, excellent. And she made this magic, which isn't really the recipe now because we didn't even know what she was using. But that was the springboard for pork stuffed pork. And it was amazing. It was just, I mean, we've had a lot of meals of good comments, but that was a huge standout for me.
Well, it sounds fascinating. Now, how did you identify what the pig parts were?
Oh, I have no idea how she did it. She knew exactly what she was doing. And she made a sausage kind of thing, like a ground sausage. And then she wrapped the pork loin around it and then baked it.
Well, it sounds like it was a lot of fun. Now,
Yep.
something you mentioned in your about growing up that really caught my attention because it's something that I happen to love. Although I have some friends who think it's sort of beneath them. That was meatloaf. I dearly love meatloaf, and I love the way you expressed your feeling towards it, especially about making the meatloaf, and prior to putting it into the oven, you ate it. You ate,
That's right.
and that became what you eventually fell in love with steak tartare, which is raw hamburg.
It's essentially raw meatloaf, although it's, way more elevated with the quail egg or, whatever kind of egg they put in it. I think it's quail, isn't it? But yes, I mean, that is I saw my mother do it. And I remember the first time seeing her, she grabbed that saltine cracker, put the meatloaf on it, put extra salt and pepper on it, and just ate it. And at first I thought that's disgusting, but it smelled so delicious. And from that moment on, I did it with her every single time.
Well, something else about your recipes that really impressed me, and something you don't find in, well, I mentioned Julia Child earlier. You would never find this in Julia Child, using ketchup
Right.
or can bought tomatoes.
Right.
I mean, these are things that, why reinvent the wheel? But I just found the way you express these things just so simple, but yet so pleasing. And I'm going to have to cook a number of your recipes, and my wife will probably kill me. But in fact, I already have asked you for a recipe, and I thank you for sending it to me.
That's right. Cassoulet.
Now, why didn't you ever put? I think you said that the Magic Hat meatballs was sort of your version of meatloaf as a recipe, but you never had a regular recipe for meatloaf in the book. Why did you exclude it?
No, I don't actually know why we didn't put meatloaf in there, except for it probably was just what we didn't write down. A lot of this came out of, by chance, the amount of time I would have available to stand next to Matthew and write down things. Or, I mean, the beer balls were just so good, and I can't remember, maybe he thought the meatloaf was too similar, but it's everything. I mean, meatloaf is one of my favorite things still. Another favorite that I have that I make all the time are the Bad Day brownies. And it's been fun to shift the recipe because I don't like crunchy chocolate in my brownie at all. So I do make the recipe slightly different than Matthew's recipe, but hundreds and hundreds of times have I made the brownie recipe. I do a lot of catering for the Farm and Wilderness Organization, and so I cook for about 300 and something people throughout the course of the summer, and the brownies are a must every single time. No variation. They're like,
you can't lose with brownies.
That's right. You can switch up all the other parts of the menu, but not the brownies.
Okay, now, just in terms of the recipes in the book, what were your favorite recipes, personal favorites?
Moussaka. So this is, it's Greek, but this is where recipes are really fascinating, and it kind of pulls everybody around the world. We're all using similar ingredients. I mean, maybe not olives before we could get olives over here and such, or avocados, in the Midwest. But so there's this bechamel sauce that goes into a moussaka, and that's what makes that layer of, the white layer on top. But when my mother made pan-fried steak with gravy, it's almost the exact same recipe. So when Matt made the bechamel, I licked it and it immediately, I was like, I'm back in my childhood. I'm back in my farm kitchen. And while I didn't love that gravy growing up, now I'm obsessed with it because it reminds me of, I think it's the memory that is even more potent to me than the flavor. But it's so delicious, and it makes it. And then I really love Mediterranean flavors. So the tagine and the moussaka, those they just feel very just sensual. That's what I love about food the most, is that it can really transport you and it makes you feel a certain way while you're eating it. And I just love the Mediterranean foods, particularly for that reason.
Have you ever tried kibinaya?
No.
That's raw lamb.
Oh, I think I would like it.
It's with let's see, let me see if I can remember the basic ingredients. There's a flour called cabal,
Hmm.
and olive oil. That's about it.
Wow.
But
I,
but the lamb has to be thrice ground. It's very finely ground. And
wow.
it's very popular, which I first had it in Lebanon and then in Saudi Arabia. It's very popular in the Middle East.
Have you ever had it in the United States?
Yes, actually, not in the United States, but in of all odd places in Prince Edward Island and Canada. We were on a tour, and I don't know how I came about this, but I was looking for a place that had Middle Eastern food, and I found one. And I had kibinaya again. I love it,
Oh,
but
I might have to travel there just so I can try it.
oh no, I think this is something you could do yourself. It's if you want, I'll send you a recipe.
I would love it.
It's I haven't made it for several years, but it's really worth trying. The key is getting a good piece of lamb.
Right.
And over in the Middle East, the lamb, as you might think, are rather lean. So you don't have a lot.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody wants to order this book, how would they go about doing it?
So the book is available on Amazon. Although if you desire a signed copy, then you can reach out to me directly, and I can make sure that we can get the book signed for you. But it is on Amazon.
This is
Ah!
this is the book, Uncommonly Good, by Tesha Buss and Matthew Wexler. And I very strongly urge people to buy it because it's the best reading you can do. It's a fun cookbook. It's also a storytelling cookbook. I think you've done a marvelous job.
Thank you so much. We wanted it to read like a book and be useful like a cookbook.
Well, okay, now it's on Amazon.
It is on Amazon.
Now, is that the only source?
That is the only source at the moment.
Okay, do you plan on enlarging that?
I don't know. It's very complicated to go through the other methods, and then you pre-buy them and make all the connections, and so it becomes a very intense marketing endeavor that we weren't for sure that we wanted to embark upon. We also, right now on Amazon, if we notice that there are any errors, we can make the errors, and then whoever buys the book from that point forward will not see the errors. So we certainly wanted to go through a time where we had some ability to change things should we have, remembered something completely incorrectly, or, spelled someone's name wrong.
Okay, again, it's Uncommonly Good, and it's Uncommonly Excellent Book. It's on Amazon. And what does the future hold for Tesha Buss?
Well, I certainly do hope that after COVID dies down, that retreats will resume. As you can imagine, sweating in a room right now in a global pandemic is not very popular. So I have, moved into some other pathways to, give myself something to do for the year. But I do believe that Good Commons will come back. All of our retreats have been coming, some of them for 11 years. So I do hope that the walls will be filled with joy and laughter and sweaty yoga and all the other types of retreats that we do soon.
Oh, wonderful. Well, Tesha, I really want to thank you for being on this show. It's been a pleasure talking to you as always, and good luck in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Ralph.
Okay, and that'll be a wrap. See you again in the future.